So welcome everyone. We're so glad you were able to join us. This is the webinar entitled Get More Volunteers, Management, Recruitment, and Retention. And you are going to be listening to a presentation from the staff at the Lifeline. My name is Carol Ludwig. I am the Network Development Coordinator here. And with me as well, we have Nikki Yates, our Online Communications Manager.
Hi, everyone.
So we're going to go ahead and go through this presentation, and if you have any questions, we would prefer if you can chat them. You'll see that chat box on the left-hand side. If you type a question into there, we will be able to answer it, so that's the best way. For right now, we have all your lines muted, so you can't speak. We are going to have two presentations from special guest speakers from two crisis centers within our network, Third Level out in Michigan and Dee Dee Hirsch out in California. So when it comes time for that, we will be unmuting the lines and asking you guys to mute them, but we'll explain that to you once we get there. So without any further delay, I'm going to pass along this presentation to Nikki Yates.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I just kind of want to start off and go over some of the basics on volunteering in the U.S. and currently where it's at. Right now, we're seeing large growth in national volunteer rates. This is actually some information from the Corporation for National Community Service, and you'll see the different demographics and how they're volunteering as a whole throughout the years. We're seeing that 13.8% of the population that volunteer are actually volunteering for social service activities, which is most applicable to us. And what's interesting is they find that these volunteers quickly realize that it's not so much what they give, but the personal feeling of accomplishment and satisfaction that they get in return that they're really looking for. They really want to feel like they're able to do something and help out when they're volunteering their time. And this provides a great opportunity for you to be able to contribute back to your community, to get them involved and have them feel like they're contributing back to their community. It's also a great opportunity for people to learn new skills, which they're finding is becoming a great motivation, especially during the recession, when people needed to expand out their skill base, show that they were well-rounded and they could do other things, and also occupy their time to fill in any gaps in their resume. So that was a big motivation to get people out of their homes and back into giving back to the communities. So what does that mean for us? How do we fit in volunteers into our program and make it work for us in a way that's both efficient and responsible, but also keeps them engaged? One of the things you really want to look at is start asking some questions. What roles can volunteers play? It doesn't necessarily have to be answering the phones. There are administrative opportunities for them. Here at the Lifeline, we use volunteers to help us with small day-to-day administrative tasks, aside from the larger pictures that we do. So you really want to look at what they can do within and then identify the qualifications for those roles. What do you need them to know? Is it Excel knowledge? Is it, clinical skills? Can you equip them with that? If so, what training programs do you need to have in place to help them be able to meet those needs? And then what needs do your volunteers have to fulfill that role? Aside from just the training, do they need a computer? Do they need a phone? What can you do to help equip them, and are you at a place where you can provide them that? If not, you want to rethink what roles those volunteers can play in your organization. Then the next step is really kind of getting organized around your volunteer program. You want to develop a database, a place where you know information about your volunteers. The people interacting with them on a regular basis know information about the volunteers. That social interaction is actually very important because of the reason people go to volunteer at the beginning. They want to feel like they're contributing something, they have a sense of accomplishment, and your social environment plays a role in that as well. If you feel supported and you feel that you can accomplish things with the people around you, you're more likely to succeed. And so you want to make sure there's that team building aspect. And then involve the volunteers in the process. Ask them how you can improve it. Volunteers are great at getting that feedback. They can provide insight that you never would have thought about, things that you thought you were covering well, but maybe weren't really doing as good of a job as you could be doing. And then look for opportunities short and long term. You want to look at not just a year commitment, but maybe there's 3-month commitments for people who are in between school sessions. or maybe people who are taking a break from work. So there are things throughout that you might be able to look at aside from that long term. And then also provide opportunities for advancement. How are you honoring your volunteers that have stayed with you throughout long periods of time? Looking at that plan as well is very important. You want to kind of reward people who've really done well and have excelled. Just as if in your job you never were promoted, it'd be kind of a disappointment to you. You want to look at how you can honor that in some way and reward that increased commitment and those accomplishments. It doesn't need to be a promotion, but it can be smaller acknowledgments. Maybe it's taking out your volunteers who've been there for 5 years or more to an intimate coffee gathering with the director so that they can just get to know that the director knows them as well, as an example. And then ask volunteers what skills they want to develop and what competencies they need to demonstrate. They might want to learn more about how to administer suicide prevention. Maybe they want to learn more about how to give talks about suicide awareness. And this is something that your team could help provide to let them know that you are listening to them and they are more than just people who fill the seats in the organization. And then develop a volunteer track for volunteers specifically looking for continued and increased involvement. There are going to be people who are just going to fulfill the commitment of a year or your 6-month commitment or whatever your center has in place. But there are going to be other volunteers who want to excel beyond that and are wanting to stay in place. And so you need to think of those two tiers, the ones who are going to be there for the commitment that you have in place and ones that you can easily see excelling and staying beyond. What does that look like in your organization and at your center? And it's going to be a little bit different, but it is something you need to put a little thought into and how you can incorporate that into your work plan. And then when you're looking at your database, you want to look at hours worked, trainings completed, how long they've been there, address, how have you rewarded them in the past? So you're not giving them the same reward every time, and it loses its value. And then finally, I think a big thing is defining roles is very important. Listing out what that volunteer will be doing. If you're going to have them be doing other things, that's fine, but kind of specify what areas that will fall into, so that they're not thrown off guard whenever they're asked to do something else. It also kind of provides that stability to the role that really helps them. Ambiguity is very hard for most people to deal with in a workplace environment. And letting them know within that role who will be overseeing them, who do they report to on a regular basis, so that if they have questions, they know where to go, or if there is a problem, someone's there helping instruct them. And also what happens when they're on vacation. Do they need to tell someone they're going out on vacation? What does that look like? These are things you're probably already doing, but a more structured process makes it a little easier for people at the outset. So when they come in to volunteer, they know from the beginning, this is what my role looks like. This is what I do if I'm going on vacation. This is who I report to. This is where I'll sit. And if I want to stay longer, this is what it might look like here at the organization. So where do you go to find these volunteers? Some interesting figures here is online. A lot of people are online volunteer. 80% of internet users regularly contribute back to their community. So it's a great place to go. Idealist, Facebook, Twitter, Cozcast, ThinkMTV is a great place for youth. A lot of city service organizations are all great places to really find great bases of people. Here in New York, the city mandates volunteering for high school students. So they have set up a whole web page where any nonprofit can post opportunities for service. And you get everything from high school students to senior citizens, and you can get groups that come in, but you specify the role and people get to see it on a regular basis. And it's a great free service to let people know that there's opportunities here in New York. A lot of cities have similar initiatives. I know Philadelphia is another city that's starting to do things of that nature. San Francisco is another city. So check out what your city offers. More and more volunteering is becoming a citywide initiative, and I'm sure there's a lot of great places there. Beyond that, Idealist, for a small fee of $25, you can post volunteer postings up there for something long-term. Facebook, using your online community, people, they're already supporting your cause online. They're very likely to come and bring that offline and support in other ways. And interesting, Twitter has one of the highest social activism rates of all the social media platforms. So putting out a simple tweet of, we're looking for volunteers, apply here, is highly effective. And the other thing is volunteer groups. Catch a Fire, Volunteer Match are all places that organizations have set up where you can go and post your needs, and they help assemble volunteers based off of the needs that you have. Most of those do charge a small fee, but they're highly effective in weeding out people that might not be a right fit. So if that's something that your organization is struggling with, where you just don't have the resources to interview 20 candidates, might be a better option for you. Then also look at doing newsletters and advertising within your community. You probably have an email system set up so that you're communicating with regular contributors in your area. Ask them. A lot of them may want to come in and contribute as well. They may know people, and they're already there supporting. Again, harnessing that power of community and association is very important. And then finally, poll existing volunteers who they may know that want to come in. A lot of people tend to stay in the same groups. So if I'm volunteering, my friends tend to volunteer, and they may have free time. Your volunteers may not even know that you're looking for more volunteers, and so haven't referred other people in. So really making those needs explicit to them and letting them be your advocates is very helpful. Once you start getting them in, how do you manage them? You really kind of want to make information as easy as possible to volunteers. Consider a web page dedicated to volunteer information. Schedules with team assignments with people assigned to a team. So Team A would work, hours 9 to 2, and Team B works 2 to 11. And people know what team they're on, and they know what that schedule looks like because it's all on that site. And you're not revealing any confidential information because people are assigned to teams. You can also post resources there, our training times, extracurricular activities to get people together outside the office so that you're really building that community again. This could also be done on a closed Facebook group. So you can create a group, invite people from Facebook to the group that are volunteers, and allow them to share information together. And you can also put information out there to them. You could also do this with any Twitters that you have on your organization and volunteers. So if they tweet, create a list of your volunteers and let them, again, share information and put information out to them so that they feel like they're part of a larger communication group. And then look at where your audience is already going. If they're already going to NING, or if they're going to a community center to gather, put information there. It's really important to look at where they're already at as opposed to trying to create something new for them. Then regularly check in with them. It's a relationship as much of it is a volunteer opportunity. It's just as you check in with your employees, check in with those volunteers. Make sure they're comfortable. Make sure they're happy. Make sure their needs are getting met as well. It could just be as simple as a 15-minute regularly meeting, quarterly. Once every 3-4 months, check in and say, hey, you've been doing a great job. How are things going? Are you still fitting in well? And this lets them know also that they're seen individually. They're not just one among the mass, that they are a person and that the organization has an investment in them as a person. And then finally, let them have a chance to air grievances that might have arisen. Shine volunteers necessarily won't come out to you directly. If something's bothering them, they'll most likely just bury it and wait until the end and not come back. But if you're regularly meeting with them, that allows them to express something. They might not like working next to Joanne, but if they have a private time to actually express that to you, you can help fix that. And then there's great technology tools out there. A great organization for volunteer management is EnergizedInc.com, and they regularly update their resources. They regularly update best practices in the field and really try to cater to nonprofits who use volunteers on a regular basis. We've also, I apologize. We also went through and compiled some technologies that help make management a bit easier. These are just some of them. We've kind of put down the initial cost, any subscription fees that may go in, whether volunteers can enter in their information themselves, if more than one staff member can look at the information at the same time, and if it allows you to schedule information. So some of these might be an option for you. Some of them are free. Some of them have a service charge to them. But if your organization relies heavily upon volunteers, these may help make that process much smoother. This document will be up in much further detail on our Member Center site, so you can go to it and find that and download it, look at it, see anything that looks like it might be of interest to you. And if you have any questions, our IT team is on hand to help answer any questions about this technology and how that might work for you. We try to be as comprehensive as we could. Obviously, this isn't in all-exclusive list where these are the only ones out there, but these are some of the more notable ones that have been highly recommended in the field. And then finally, after you're managing them, how do you keep them? Volunteers really need to feel like they are playing an important role and are highly needed. And they need to feel like they have a responsibility and like they're recognized. So while we may think that in suicide prevention the need is pretty obvious, sometimes it can get lost in the day-to-day business. So highlighting how much they've helped your organization and your center is really important, even if it's the small things. And that can be formal and informal recognition. Sometimes it's just a walking down the hall and saying, hey, John, you did a great job yesterday. Thanks for all you've done this past year. Or it could be something more formal where an appreciation banquet is done. But think of both of those processes because they're both just as important as the other. And then ensure that volunteers are meshing with whoever is supervising them. And that's an important thing. Whoever is looking over them and is managing them needs to have a great rapport with most volunteers. If there's a glitch there, they're not likely to stay, just as an employee wouldn't stay with a boss that they're not meshing with as well. And then make sure that volunteers feel equipped to do their job. That's very important. If you feel like you're not being efficient, you're not able to actually make an accomplishment, you don't feel like you can do the job, so you're going to leave at the end. So make sure they feel adequate, and and part of that means having adequate resources and motivation. So checking in is very, very key there. And training is very key. Don't overlook how important that can be. I know we regularly offer assist trainings to our centers. The Center Training and Practicing Division can update your center on that if you need that training as well. But we also offer great resources within our member center site to help with that. And we're trying to update those more and more through our blogs and through our social media sites. So we're hoping that we can provide you guys with more resources to give to your volunteers and to your staff as well to help make that easy. And then stay up on best practices. Collaborate with other centers. Talk to us. We really kind of want to make this a place where you guys can come to us with questions and we can brainstorm together on important needs that will make your volunteers happy and what's going on in the field. Also research. Handsonnetwork.org is a great news site as well that really puts out the best practices in volunteer management, as does the Energize Inc. site. And then revise your plan every year. Look at it. Is this working? Are you losing more volunteers this year than you did last year? If so, what needs to be changed? If you're losing less, then you're on the right track. How can you make it better? There's always improvements that can be made, but as long as you're relooking at it frequently, you can make those improvements and you can readjust, and your volunteers will be happier and your process will be much smoother, and it'll reduce any workload on other staff that you have if this process is really firm and in place. So on the collaboration notes, we have 2 centers in the Lifeline Network that we're really utilizing volunteers in great ways, and we kind of want to let them share some of the ways that they're doing it and allow them to speak to it. So I'm going to introduce Mickey from Third Level. I'm going to unmute us now, so hold with me right now. So I'm going to hand it over to Mickey, and thank you guys.
Mickey, are you there? Let's try one other thing. Hang on one second.
The conference is now in talk mode.
Okay, now in talk mode. There I am. Hi.
Okay, so if everyone could, because of the way we have to set up this webinar, to mute your lines just so we don't hear background noise, we ask that you press *6, and then to unmute your line, you can press #6. So if you guys could go ahead and just mute your lines, that'd be really great. And without further ado, we would like to turn this over to Mickey at Third Level.
Well, thanks, Nikki. What a wonderful set of ideas. I sure got a whole lot about how to recruit and retain good volunteers. That was wonderful. I look forward to, stealing more from it after it gets up on the members-only website. Here at Third Level, we're kind of a small private nonprofit organization that provides, 24-hour crisis intervention, information referral, suicide prevention. Obviously, we serve on the Lifeline, access to mental health emergency services, and, the full continuum of care for runaway homeless and street youth. We're small. Like I said, our budget's a little over $1 million a year, and we provide services in 19 counties in northern lower Michigan, so it's pretty rural and dispersed. We take about 26,000 contacts a year and see many more youth and in our youth serving programs. We use paid crisis workers around the clock and have always seen volunteers as adding depth to our service. We take in about 26,000 contacts a year, and having volunteer energy as the second chair on the shift is very helpful. And we have a history of using volunteers, but in the early 1990s, the substance abuse prevention folks that were funding our volunteer program decided to use their funds in a more targeted way, whereas, recruiting and screening volunteers who were trained in crisis intervention was more broad brush. So they redirected their funding, and our program really started to fall. So a lot of these thoughts come from our efforts in the last year and a half or so to revamp our volunteer and training program, specifically as it relates to the crisis line, because we were blessed to receive the supplemental funding that NSPL put together for us, and so we're real grateful about that. So we got to work and developed our recruitment campaign, which is pretty consistent with what Nikki was saying. We started about 6 weeks before our training would begin, doing this 3 times a year, using social media and press releases and things like that, so that we could actually hope to target people who we were interested in recruiting. We have a lot of retirees, folks who've been in the helping professions, and they make great crisis workers. Young people looking to figure out what their career aspirations are. People who are natural helpers in their life and want a chance to exercise that. And people who maybe work in fields other than the helping professions and want a chance to explore that part of themselves. And so we send out some pretty wide-ranging information to recruit in all these different places. So here we see our recruitment sort of flyer and basic information. We allow the person who's interested to email, to call, to physically come in and fill out an application, to download one from our website and email it back to us, trying to make it as easy as possible. And we started right out with, with the questions that hopefully target those people who would be perhaps most appropriate for working on the crisis line. Do you enjoy challenges? Well, yes, this is a challenge. Helping people with diverse backgrounds and working as a team. Do people tell you that you're a good listener? Those phrases seem to be pretty useful in terms of resonating with people who we think would be a good choice to volunteer at our crisis line. As you can see, we don't take potential crisis workers under the age of 18, and we ask them for a 150-hour commitment. And you tell them right up front that they're also going to have to pass a criminal background check, and that they're going to have to be able to use a computer to do the work. And so that also, helps people decide whether this might be a good fit for them. All righty. I'll just keep going unless you guys have questions or I see them on the chat thing. So our volunteer application is kind of like a paid staff application. It's we want to know about their experience and qualifications, their reasons for applying. Again, asking them, have you ever been convicted of a crime? To let them know that, we're going to have to screen for those kinds of issues that might preclude you being able to serve. Third Level has 24-hour in-person crisis counseling as well. We also use volunteers in our youth serving programs, and so folks who don't pass that background check aren't going to be able to volunteer with us. And that's the exact same expectation that paid staff, we have for paid staff. And so it's a fairly intense volunteer application. And so they have the same standards, and they fill it out, and they send it in to us. Once we've decided to give someone an interview, we'll spend about an hour with them. 2 people. We'll be interviewing them, usually perhaps the training manager, the volunteer manager, or one of the counselors. And we'll evaluate them along this continuum of aspects that we think are real important to have in someone who's a good fit to be a volunteer crisis worker. We would also use this for our people who would volunteer in other ways with us. I really understand and agree with what Nikki was saying about how even in crisis centers we can look at many different ways that people can help out. And once we opened up our minds and hearts to that, people who want to help us with special projects, with other administrative tasks, with fundraising, with youth events, it's just been exciting how that has exploded. But we certainly do interview every one of them. And we want to get a sense of how open are they, how caring. Can they be concrete with us about who they are? Folks who are rejecting of others' values are not a good choice. People who can't challenge individuals or confront what they see might also not be that great in crisis work. We're looking for mature, reliable folks who may have some skills that maybe they learned from the School of Hard Knocks, but they have skills. People who are perceptive, who think about why is it that people do the things they do, and they're curious about that. Folks whose own situations are more stable rather than unstable. Don't get me wrong here. We don't preclude people who are in counseling or therapy from volunteering on the crisis lines or in other capacities. In particularly on the crisis lines, we would probably ask someone, and it would ask someone who is a step forward who's currently in counseling if their counselor would share some thoughts about their opinion about whether their client might be ready for such a challenging volunteer opportunity. Then we provide an overall rating in terms of is this going to be a good fit for the crisis line or whatever work we're having them do. Also in evaluating the volunteer interview, we look at these more open-ended questions that the sort of Likert scale, if you will, might not get at, so that the interviewer gets a chance to just sort of look at their strengths and weaknesses. Why are they here? I got to tell you, reasons for applying, that's a very critical one. Nikki alluded to motivations in people for applying. What I've learned over the years is that people who step forward to a volunteer opportunity or any type of change, they really are in transition in their lives. Something's on the move, and they've decided that volunteering may help further their progress in life or may help them remediate something that's been troubling them. I think it's important to try to find that out and for us to clarify that and to share that understanding real directly with the interviewee. Just understand why you're here, and so that we can see if what we have to offer has a chance of meeting those needs. If the reasons for applying don't fit with what we can offer, then we can always suggest another volunteer opportunity. But having a good, long discussion and good understanding of their reasons for applying is real important.
Hi, Mickey, it's Carol speaking right now. I just want to jump in. I saw a question came in, and I just wanted to read it out to you. The question came in from Connie at Vermont 211. And she wants to know if you were able to share some of your volunteer management materials, such as the application and evaluation form, to utilize any ideas and templates for their own volunteer program.
Well, I would be happy to share all the forms that we use. Would I send that directly to her?
You can actually, Mickey, if you send that to me, I will make sure to pass that along.
Okay, I'll send that to you, Carol. Okay.
Okay, great. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. No problem. I can send those tools. They're simple tools, but the most important thing is that the organization has a commitment to using them consistently and to acting on the information that you get. It's not easy to tell someone that in our best assessment or opinion, this is not a good volunteer opportunity for them. And so the volunteer manager needs to, be able to have some skill in that regard and allow for the interviewee to ask questions about that and to be given opportunities and ideas about where else they may donate their talents and their time. This is, as I said, the interviews are conducted by two folks, and the evaluation takes place immediately, separately afterwards, so that each interviewer gets a chance to put their thoughts down and is not necessarily unduly influenced by a conversation with the other interviewer. And so sometimes the two interviewers can't make an agreement together about whether to accept someone into training, and so then we may consult with another person, indicating, yes, this is a labor-intensive process and one we can engage in because, again, we are a small center that does not have 70 volunteers going at any given time, and so we take our time with this up front. Whoa, this is kind of a trip. I put together this flowchart as a way of helping us get focused on our journey to encourage more folks to volunteer with us and for us to do right by them. As I said, volunteers and interns are used in a variety of capacities here, and getting a sense of the steps helps us to not forget any of them. For example, if a person ends up on Michigan's Central Registry for those folks who've been interviewed for child abuse and neglect, they cannot volunteer or work with us in a paid capacity because of our work with youth. We're going to want to know that before we get too far down the road with someone who wants to interview with us or volunteer with us. And so that's a part of how I think the flowchart helps. It helps us to look at what different personnel within our organization need or should be involved with the volunteer. All crisis line volunteers have the crisis services manager as their direct supervisor. It is that person who is responsible for their care, their development, their clinical supervision while they're doing crisis work. Different volunteers in different capacities would be assigned someone else who may be their direct supervisor. This flowchart helps us to be sure to remember that we do that. As you can see, our training is pass-fail, and so the flowchart also helps us decide what to do in the event that a potential crisis volunteer did not successfully complete training. So not everybody resonates with this flowchart, but I know that I refer to it from time to time when I get confused about what are we supposed to do next. So I found it useful. Once a person is accepted into third level's volunteer training program, you can see that we put them through 40 hours of counselor skill training, and most of you who are AAS accredited know that that's part of what we need to do. Those of you who've been in crisis intervention for a long time, like myself, know that a 40-hour time frame is pretty much has been a standard since the 70s when I went through training. So that gives you a clue about how old of a gal I'm getting to be. We pre- and post-test our trainees with the same instrument that gets at these aspects here, and it's sort of open-ended questioning. We expect to see some progress, and understanding with more depth what empathic listening really is, what legal and ethical considerations really are, what suicide assessment really entails, that sort of thing. Since putting together this presentation, we've added more pieces to the training. For example, we found this delightful video of Carl Rogers with Gloria. Some of you older folks might remember those excellent training videos, and showing pieces of Rogers' listening capacities is, I think, real inspiring to folks and gets them going. Rogers is so transparent and real that it makes for a wonderful introduction. Norm Kagan, he was a professor at Michigan State, and so many of the Michigan crisis centers had used his counselor training short-term client systems training process. We've added to it, but in the first 20 hours, I think Kagan's process of just teaching folks how to listen and using his interpersonal process recall for feedback and skill building really helps. It still works after all this time. The second 20 hours is more focused on understanding and building skills with particular types of presentations and clients. This is when we bring in other staff members, and volunteers are included, current volunteers, to provide outside role plays of youth in crisis, folks with mental health problems, suicidal presentations, that sort of thing. We try to provide an introduction to what we call structural empathy there, which is about responding to the person's way of moving through life, which is something in addition to their feelings and their values. This helps us have an opportunity to use the crisis intervention moment for change when we can. So we do that. We've also added some videos of our own creation about homeless youth and mental health video on stigma on mental illness, and those have been really helpful lately. So, as I said, we evaluate the crisis trainees and see how they did, and that's based on evaluating every single session. That's another piece we've added. We have particular training objectives for each session and a specific evaluation. Makes for long nights for the trainers, but after the trainees leave for the evening, we sit down and fill those out, and that gives us a much better way to track their progress and growth, and lets us feel more clear if we do have to tell someone that even after training that this is not a good volunteer opportunity for them. So I think Nikki said a lot of great things about retention that I don't need to necessarily repeat here, other than that old book, Marlene Wilson's The Effective Management of Volunteer Programs, still works and has great insights. Finding out what it is that really excites volunteers about being connected with your center is important, and then you find a way to meet that. I think many crisis volunteers are very much motivated by achievement and being helpful, and so providing opportunities for them to learn new things and discuss their cases is critical. So we really are looking forward to continuing to grow our volunteer program. We've sort of doubled the number of volunteers. We kind of knew that if we started to ask them to come, they would, and we have. And so we're on a course to continue to grow our volunteer program and improve it, because we're going to keep investing in it, and I'm grateful for that here. Well, that's all that I have to share today. So thanks for giving me the time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Nikki. Very good job. And we are now going to turn it over to Sandri Kramer, who works at DD Hirsch in Los Angeles, California, and she's going to talk to you about her center and their practices. So, Sandri, are you all set?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so I totally agree with Mickey. That's just been very helpful information that you guys at Lifeline put together, but I also really enjoyed everything that Mickey showed everyone as well. So for DD Hirsch, we, formerly known as the LA Suicide Prevention Center, we are actually one of the oldest crisis line programs in the country, and as a matter of fact, this lovely-looking gentleman in the left-hand corner there is one of our founding fathers, Dr. Norman Farborough, and he is still around and still involved here, in particular with our survivors program, but also comes to graduation luncheon for our training classes, so that's really nice. What I wanted to say is that we really are not able, we wouldn't have been able to survive this long without focusing on these 4 key areas of, where do we find our volunteers, how do we recruit them, how do we screen them, how to train them, and ultimately how to retain them. So those are the things I kind of want to briefly go over. I know I'm a bit short on time, so if I am going a little too quickly with some of these things, I think it's just because it's already been discussed. But if you have any specific questions, feel free to put those out there via the chat. So first, in terms of volunteer recruitment, we do all kinds of different things, but one of the first ones that we definitely cannot, even in limited budget times, that we cannot forego is advertising. We use free ones like Volunteer Match and Craigslist, and I saw a question earlier about that. We definitely do get some spam, but we actually have gotten some actual great volunteers from Craigslist. You just have to be on top of it. It's a little bit intensive because your name or your organization and what you want to do disappears down a very long list very quickly. So every day, or maybe every half a day, I don't know how often you're able to do this, you're going to have to go in there and refresh it so that you're the one who appears somewhere near the top 10. So those are free. Weekly papers we find are a really great way of getting the word out because A, their advertising rates are relatively low, and second of all, they really target the local communities. And I don't know about other crisis centers, but in our case, the crisis center volunteers need to come to our location. And in LA, with our traffic issues, it's really important that we target our local areas because people, if they have to travel from too far away, they can easily add on 2 hours of commuting time to their 4-hour shift, and we certainly don't want people to do that. Community calendars are another really great way of doing free advertising. These are a lot of towns and cities are up on the internet these days, and they have calendars available for events that are coming up, and they actually do allow you, if you're close enough, at least in our experience, to put upcoming trainings on, and that can be very helpful as well. Again, targeting those local communities. The other thing that we put our flyers out, and I just want to kind of say that I think it's very important that you do spend some time and resources on creating professional recruitment materials. I mean, in the past, we've just done little, bits of paper stuck on telephone poles and things like that, but really the more professional your materials look, the more, I think the higher quality of volunteers you are able to attract. So I definitely recommend spending some resources on that and perhaps getting specific funding for that. And then actually libraries and local gathering spots such as coffee shops are actually really good places we found to put these volunteer brochures out and get people to notice us. I'll move through these a little bit more quickly. Health fairs, that's just one example, but a lot of communities have various fairs going on at various times of the year, and oftentimes for nonprofits are, you can get a booth or a table for free. You recruit some volunteers who like to be able to do this kind of thing, and they're out there and they're spreading the word, and it can be extremely helpful as well and free. Okay, so for colleges and universities, we actually, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later on when I talk about retention, but we are lucky enough in this area that we have quite a number of graduate programs and undergraduate programs as well in helping professions such as psychology, social work, and things like that. And so that makes it that's kind of a really great pool to draw from, because you have a lot of, especially in undergrads, a lot of people who would love to get some counseling experience, but are unable to get that because they don't have a degree yet. And this would be a really great way for them to do that. So if you put your advertising out there using the internet, for example, I would use a lot of taglines like, want to get some counseling experience or things like that to really draw in people who are specifically looking for that. Another thing that you can do is build relationships with your local colleges and universities and see if they perhaps can offer credit hours. We have, I think, a couple of local colleges that do that. As well as with the graduate programs, perhaps offer internships. We are not able to do it. We don't have the resources for that, but I definitely have heard of a number of crisis centers out there who do that, and I think it's a really great way of getting some quality volunteers in as well. We have a very active Survivors After Suicide program, and I know that a lot of centers diversify and have different programs that they run. Look within those pools of people connected to those other programs to kind of cross-volunteer. Especially in our survivors programs, we obviously have a lot of people who are very dedicated to suicide prevention. Now, mind you, a lot of them are not able to do this kind of work. They're emotionally too perhaps overwrought or too attached, simply not a good fit. But you do come across a lot of passion, and perhaps even within their immediate surroundings, they may find people who are good fits. And we've actually gotten quite a number of our volunteers from our Survivors program, and those that are survivors add so much to crisis line work. So don't forget to overlook other components of your center. We do a lot of speaking engagements and trainings, and we literally have a special slide at the end of each training a presentation that we do that just briefly highlights our volunteer program. So no matter where we are, we always have some materials with us, and I think that can be very helpful. Oftentimes, if you do a really good training or some form of speaking engagement, people get interested in you, and they want to kind of help out. And so for some of them, the best way to do that might be to volunteer. So just always have those materials with you. Be very helpful. Law enforcement, I specifically am highlighting that because I think that if you are able to build good relationship with your local law enforcement agencies, you might be able to do what we're doing, which is brought up with that second point over there, is build them a special shift and get them into a rotation on the crisis line. We currently have that in place with our local FBI agents, the negotiators, as well as LAPD and Beverly Hills PD and Irvine in Orange County PD. They come in on a monthly or weekly rotation to keep their own active listening skills sharp. And it's such a great way to, strengthen relationships. We need those. And it's really actually helped them quite a bit in their own line of work. So I highly recommend building relationship and seeing if perhaps some of them might be interested in a rotation. More than a month, I would not recommend because, especially with the police departments, they can get a little rusty. We have really good luck, though, with our FBI agents. They tend to be very well trained and are very interested in doing this kind of work. So media outreach, we get quite a number of requests. Always a good opportunity to put a little plug out there for volunteers. So I know when a training is coming up. When we do a radio show or something like that, we ask that the radio show put on their website when our training comes up, just not just our number, our crisis line number, but also how to volunteer. Social media, already mentioned by Nikki earlier, it's an amazingly great way to get people to notice you, to find you easily, and connect and want to be connected to you. And then this last point, the website, we've been waiting for a very long time. Unfortunately, we're now part of a larger agency, D.D. Hirsch, which is great fiscally, but it can sometimes add some layers of bureaucracy, and it might make it more difficult to get something done, such as our website. So we're still waiting to get that updated, but if you are just, any bit of time that you can spend on getting your website improved, and updated in general, it makes such a big difference because as you will find out in this next slide, the internet is the #1. We track on how volunteers find us, and the internet is by far the greatest source of volunteer recruitment. So that website becomes even more important. And as I mentioned earlier, if you know or savvy enough or do know somebody who can do this for you to add keywords and taglines that can help people find you easier in searches, please don't forget to do that. Well, the fact that the internet is the #1 way of people finding us is probably not surprising because as we just heard from Nikki, that 80% of the internet users do volunteer. So having a good presence is very important. The second one, current volunteers or staff. I do want to say something about that. We didn't realize ultimately how much our current volunteers and staff members talk about us and their experience over here and how that helps people be drawn to us and want to volunteer here as well. The reason I want to highlight that is actually we're currently experiencing something that we haven't had before, and that we actually are suffering a little bit from a higher turnover rate than we've ever experienced before, and we realize that has to do with the fact that our number 3 recruitment spot is universities. First of all, I think it's really important to have a very diverse volunteer population, period. I think that adds depth to the quality of care that you were able to provide your callers. But as we found out, it also kind of helps with the stability and retention, because if you get a lot of volunteers from colleges and universities, they move on after a year or two. And that's just not something that we've had before. We've never really had a huge issue with people staying beyond the 1-year commitment, but I'm starting to notice a trend into the wrong direction. And so we're actually having a plan in place right now. We're going to contact our volunteers and staff members who are representing a different pool, so to speak, and brainstorm with them in how to recruit more volunteers like them. Again, the media, I already mentioned that. That's very important. That's how people find us a lot. And then those promotional materials are extremely important. Okay, so moving on quickly to screening. This, by the way, this picture over here, that's our current brochure that we use for our volunteer recruitment. And yes, it's a little dramatic to start with saying help save a life, but it draws people in. So don't be afraid to be a little bit over the top. For our volunteer application, well, it's very similar to third level. It's pretty intense. It's almost the same as for our employees. We also require a background check. However, in our case, we don't do it in the very beginning because people tend to drop out throughout the training process. But we do let them know that that is something that they have to pass. 21 and older is what we are looking for. There is a team line in LA that we provide backup, emergency backup for, and so if we get applicants that are younger than 21, we highly recommend team line and we send them their way. We do ask some personal details, but it's limited. There are some questions that we can't ask anymore now that we're part of a bigger agency. In the past, we would ask questions about, a history of mental illness and things like that, and we just simply don't do that. But we use a pre-interview questionnaire to try and tease out some of that, and I'll go over that in a minute. Once we receive a volunteer application, and that can be done online just to make it savvy, since so many people find us via the internet, but also in the mail. Our training coordinator is the person in charge of processing all of these applications. He sets up a phone interview to do a bit of a pre-screening. Now, the pre-screening helps us because unlike with third level, we only have one person do the actual interview when they come in for the interview. But if during the pre-screening phone interview some red flags might have come up, then we always make sure a second person is available. So that kind of helps. It also helps us literally pre-screen people out of the process. Before they come in or as they come in, they're given the pre-test for our training. We want to make sure that they do that prior to receiving any other materials from us to make it as, solid as possible. And then just like, by the way, with third level, the process is exactly the same. But we also ask them to complete a multiple choice questionnaire. And that is, I'm actually pulling it up in front of me. Basically what this is, it's called the interview questionnaire, and what we're asking them to do is to take a few minutes, no more than 10, to complete the questionnaire. And that what we're looking for are natural instincts and no prior experience or training, but just instincts and attitudes which will help us determine if they're able to handle situations on the crisis phone as they arrive. So I don't even know if I need to give you an example. It helps us tease out some things like homophobia, for example, maybe strong religious beliefs that they would not be able to keep to themselves. And so I'm trying to look for a good example of that. For example, for mental illness, how do you feel about that stigma? Question 6 asks, if someone had prior experience with substance abuse or mental illness, do you think they would A, make a better counselor because they have had experience with those issues, B, be questionable as effective counselor because of that experience, C, be traumatized by a caller who may describe a similar experience to theirs, D, only be able to handle STC calls after a substantial amount of recovery time? Well, we actually tell people none of the answers are necessarily wrong or right, but we're looking for some that are maybe more appropriate than others. And so this would be one way to kind of tease out potential stigma. So that is very helpful because after they've done this questionnaire, it then helps guide the interview. So the training coordinator in the interview goes through the questionnaire, and a conversation kind of naturally comes from that. And so while we don't have the same evaluation list that Mickey showed us, it certainly has things in there that were very similar that get teased out through the multiple choice interview questionnaire that we use. In the screening interview, we also explore reasons why they perhaps want to come and do this. We heavily emphasize the commitment and flexibility, and I'm going to go over our training overview in just a second. And we throw everybody blind into a little bitty role play that everybody does. It's exactly the same one for all of them. And again, it gives us some ideas about appropriateness. This very same role play gets them modeled for them during the first day of training. by the training coordinator and one of our staff members, so that people can see, okay, that's, you know, they have an expectation of how these things might be done on the crisis line. That was a little joke. That doesn't work anymore because it's supposed to slowly come in, but an overview of our training does not start with an in-depth training of our sophisticated telephony system, which actually is somewhat more sophisticated than what you're seeing over here. But I do want to give you a quick overview. Our training is pretty involved. It starts off with an assist weekend, and it gets followed by 7 full Saturdays and even 9 to 5. There is one break in between, usually after week 4. We hold from week 3. It involves lectures and role plays. We typically have morning lectures, then we have a role play session, then we break for lunch, during which time the trainers meet for lunch and do a debrief and go over all the role plays, all the different volunteers. Afterwards, there's another role play session. The role play session lasts about an hour and a half, and then we typically have a different lecture at the very end of the day. We offer midpoint reviews. We also ask, we have webinars in addition to that. We team people up midway with a phone buddy who's also a mentor who has had at least 1 year of crisis line experience. That's an extremely helpful thing. So these are people that they can now, not only they can role play, an actual role play with, without sitting in a small group. This is how we do our role plays, because we recognize there's such a thing as performance anxiety, but really allow them to make it as real as possible. So they schedule times with their phone buddies, and we ask for a minimum of 3 role plays that they do with them, and then we receive evaluation forms. The training team receives evaluation forms from the phone buddies. We ask for a minimum of 12 hours of listening in. So they come to the crisis line, they schedule this in advance. Trainees, by the way, are the only people who are allowed to listen in on both sides of the line, in our case. We give them an end of training review with which details the things that they have to work on. And then once they go on the lines, they enter a 3-month probationary period. Nobody gets to go on the lines unless we feel that they are not going to be detrimental to our callers. But we definitely have a variety of weaknesses and skills amongst the trainees. The volunteer training, well, our expectations are set at a pretty high level. I actually think that, God, I remember that kind of shifted. I've been with the center now for almost 15 years, and in the very beginning it was more like, hey, they're warm bodies and they're just here volunteering their time, and there was just a lot of leeway that they had, basically. That atmosphere has really changed quite a bit, mostly because we're able to recruit much better, and that really helps. It helps, you know, the more you recruit, obviously the more able you are to get quality people, and the more you're able to turn those away who are not, you know, right and would represent only just a warm body, to use that phrase again. So setting it at a high level also kind of, you know, shows them that, hey, this is what we're expecting, but you look how much you're getting out of it. We give them lots of critical feedback. We want to make sure that they're able to obtain that feedback. As we evaluate them after each role play, we ask them to also do a self-evaluation, so we make sure that they receive that feedback. That's been a very helpful tool as well. Informed consent. It's very important that you not be afraid, and Nikki mentioned this earlier as well, to turn people away. There may be a point in the training, and it may come early on, it may come towards the end, that it's just clear you don't have the right kind of skill set. But we do want to give people a chance, and we let people know that, yes, we let them into the training because we think they could develop the right skill set, but that will have to play itself out. We've gotten, again, much better over the past 5 years or so of being able to do that. And you need to find a person, a training coordinator or a volunteer coordinator who is able to do that. Like Nikki said, that's very important. We even allow people on the crisis line, as I mentioned, even if their skills may be slightly weaker, but they're going to be on a probation. Everybody is on probation. Most of them pass probation, but there have been, I would say, at least once a year, people who will, probably more than that, probably more like 3 times a year, trainees might not pass their probation. But we're lucky enough that we work with an on-site, on-shift supervisor, and they get lots of feedback throughout that probationary period and lots of monitoring. So that kind of helps catch weaker skills and earlier on and help build them as well. Volunteers definitely have to be flexible. This flexibility is actually something that shows up already in the training, in the screening process, because if they have a hard time coming to an interview, that gives you some notion of their availability and flexibility. We ask for a minimum of 1 year commitment. I think it's really great what Nikki mentioned earlier about, hey, you know, you might have people who can do only 3 months. I think that works very well, but not for the crisis line itself. So you can use those volunteers in different capacities, but our training is so intense and so involved and involves so many resources from our end that at the very minimum, that's what we need to get out of it. I already mentioned that we also do background checks. And once people are on the crisis line, we require continuing education, and we offer that. And people can get it in a number of ways, but it keeps them involved and sort of helps with the retention part. Okay, so just quickly going over our retention. Well, first of all, shift bonding is extremely important. Nikki already mentioned that a lot of people volunteer because of the social environment. Well, they get to do that a lot at Didi Hirsch because everybody has a set shift. So that's their own shift with their own shift supervisor, who quite often operates as the den mother or den father of that shift. They provide a lot of comfort. There's tons of food always that comes around. The supervisors bring it in, the volunteers bring it in. And a lot of them actually do things as a group, as a shift group, if they bond it well, outside of the crisis center. Anything from skydiving, believe it or not, to karaoke nights and things like that. And that just says a lot about, like, you know, if you have you need to get good shift supervisors who, by the way, for us are often paid staff, but not always. They may be volunteers as well. Media and outreach opportunities really help a lot. It's actually something that Nikki also mentioned earlier. Some of them, they want to expand their roles. Now, for us, they can do that by becoming perhaps a shift supervisor if they have the right qualifications, but also if they really like to do training or they like to go out to high schools and talk with teens or visit those health fairs, do things like that. That's fairly important, that you have several, or you have a number of opportunities that people can do to help keep them on board as a volunteer that goes beyond just being a crisis line counselor. The work environment is very important. When we first came to Didi Hirsch, they didn't quite know what to do with us. We had a little room that was somebody else's office, basically, and there was not enough room at all for the volunteers, and people would sit on desks, and we lost probably about a third of our volunteers during that transitionary period. But over the years, we've really carved out a good spot for ourselves within this center, and have a really lovely space now where the counselors can take calls inside a different room, which is there's just a glass barrier, so there's not as much of a physical separation, but they can really concentrate on the calls. And then outside of the calls, there's very comfortable couches. There are always tons of magazines around. We even had a board member donate a TV with cable. This is mostly for the overnight staff, and the call volume is low, but it's kind of important to provide them with a place that they really want to come to. And the in-services, we ask people, what do you need from us? As Nikki also mentioned earlier, you've got to recognize potential needs that they have that we might not have covered in the training, or that we think we covered well enough and we find out we did not. And again, if you do that regularly, people stay involved, not just because of the social part, but also because they continue to learn and remain interested. Thank you is a really big deal. If you look over here on the left-hand side, that represents.
Sorry, you know what, Sandri, I just want to. I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
No, try to go through it so quickly. It's so much. I'm sorry.
I know you have such wonderful information, but I did just want to interrupt you for a second. I saw that a question did come in from Bernie with regard to your presentation. And she wants to know if your center charges for training, and if so, does it hinder potential volunteers from pursuing opportunities?
That's a very good question. We do not officially charge for our training, no. We ask for a donation, and the suggested donation is $50 because they do get, you know, a manual out of it. I think if you make it a donation, then if you use that phrase, then it will lessen the potential barrier and also get people who are actually willing to do that. And then oftentimes they give us more than $50. $50 doesn't even come close to covering the cost, but it helps a little bit.
Right. Thank you.
So,
well, Sandri,
yeah,
I just wanted to, I know I interrupted you. You gave a wonderful presentation, so before I cut you off, I just wanted to see if there are a couple last points that you wanted to make.
No, just to let you know that in this particular case, these tenure awards that we have up, one of them, if you've been volunteering for the Crisis Center for more than 5 years, you get a permanent flag. And people, that is actually a great motivator to help people stay on board. They want to make it to the 5-year board, or perhaps beyond that to the 10-year board. And they're very little things, but I think they're really, really important. And just having regular thank you notes and things like that. And also, I just want to quickly say about volunteer retention, we use iSparrow. It's very important that you help people, you know, in as much as you can to cover themselves. We do monthly raffles for people who do cover for other folks. All these little things help quite a bit, just to make their life easier. And that's the final point, really, because what I wanted to show, this is my final slide, is basically if you feel that you're losing volunteers, don't think the end is near, as long as you concentrate on these 4 areas.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sandri. So I know we went over our time today, but everyone, I'm really excited that you stayed on the line to hear the presentation. Like I said, if you guys want, we're going to have this presentation. We did record it, so it's going to be up on our members-only website. You'll have access to that, to the PowerPoint slides as well. And I did just want to make sure I got everyone's questions that came in the chat during the presentation. I noticed that there was one from Thomas. He had a question for you, Mickey. He wanted to know if you have 24-hour... Oh, the chat just went away.
Uh-oh, I think I did that.
Ah, okay.
I'm sorry, what do I do?
No worries. I think we lost it for the moment. But if you guys have any questions, you can unmute your phones right now. It's going to be #6. Any questions at all?
I'm so sorry. Do you recall the question that the one guy had before I turned off the chat?
You know, it was Thomas Hutter, and he wants to know if you had 24-hour on-site something. I can't remember off the top of my head. But we should be able to pull up that information, and we can find out the answer to your question, Thomas, and get back to you.
He wanted to know if you had 24-hour supervision of volunteers.
Ah, thank you. Someone remembered.
Well, yes, the volunteers are always receive direct assistance and supervision from a paid staff in the second chair.
Yeah, we have the same at duty rehearsal, though on the overnights we actually mostly have paid staff only.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and if you have any questions that you think of, please feel free to contact either myself or Nikki. You'll find our information here on the last slide. And I will definitely send out an email to everyone with the information that they asked about. Is that it?
If you wanted copies of Mickey's evaluation, please send us an email so that we can make sure we get that to you.
Yes. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and take care, all right?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.